Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm doing my February 2025 wrap-ups, and I had a very mixed bag reading this month. I feel like in the last few videos or for the past few years, I've really said that book clubs are great because it forces you, or I guess encourages you to read books that you normally wouldn't read, and you may discover really great books or really great genres. However, for this month, both my book club books or two of my free book club books were duds. And I was like, I am only reading this and finishing it because I respect my fellow book club members and I will finish this book so we can talk about it. But I did not really enjoy reading them. But I'll get into that in a little bit. The first book I read in February was a really great start to the month. This is a book club I have with just me and my friends. I don't know if it counts as a book club, it's just the two of us. But this was a good selection because I picked it and it wasn't a dud. So it's The Woman by Kristin Hannah. I gave this a 5 out of 5. This book was such a roller coaster. Like it, so basically we follow Frankie, who is a young woman in America, and the background is during the Vietnam War, and basically her brother enlists, and early spoiler but not a big spoiler is he gets killed while at war in Vietnam, and she is motivated to also be part of the war and give support. And this book kind of talks about the historical context of women that participated in the Vietnam War, but very seldomly referred to or acknowledged. She was a army nurse, and the story is just crazy because I knew nothing about this history. And you just follow Frankie. You know, she's so young, like in her late teens. She joins the army as a nurse, and she goes through like decades of all this like life experience of love, loss, friendships, and it's not only just set in Vietnam during the war, but also when she comes back to America and follows her for several decades. And it was just such a roller coaster. Like it's very rare this happens, but when it does happen, it's such a good feeling. I for 2 nights stayed up till 2 a.m. reading this book, and I think one of the nights I even debated on staying up until I finished it, but I was like, nah, I gotta be responsible and I have to, get some sleep for work. But I really recommend this book. It really changed my view of the Vietnam War as well, because I'm not American, I'm Canadian, and I don't really know a lot about Vietnam War, but it was interesting to learn about how people's view of the war changed as it was happening. The next book I read has been on my list for a bit. Okay, this is a very prolific author, so it's obviously it's not going to be a shocker who this author is. It's Stephen King, and I've always been kind of like wary of reading horror books because I read one of his books when I was really young, like a child, Dreamcatcher, and it really like gave me so many nightmares. So I've been avoiding horror for a long time, but last year or like 2 years ago, I read Pet Sematary and I really, really enjoyed it. So I had The Shining on my list for a very long time. And I gave this a 4 out of 5. And I also have never watched a movie, but obviously I know like all the different like memes and like iconic moments from it. So I was in the mood for a Stephen King book, and it really hit the spot. I really enjoyed it. It was fun to read. I did feel like there was a lot of build up that was happening though until anything spooky or paranormal was happening. So that was kind of like why I gave it a 4. But aside from that, it was a really great book. It just hit the spot for like horror. I also watched a movie right after, and fun fact, because I read the book first, and the husband's name was Jack or Jackie, I believe, and the iconic scene, Jack Nicholson says, "Here's Johnny," when he looks through like the door. And when I was watching the movie, I was like, oh, maybe they changed the name of the character in the book to the movie, and that's why says, "Here's Johnny." But in the movie, his name is also Jack or Jackie. So I was kind of confused. And when I watched the scene, I was like, oh, maybe I have a false memory of him saying, "Here's Johnny." But when the scene came, when it was, "Here's Johnny," he does say, "Here's Johnny." So I Googled it, and what happened was the scene is kind of like very manic, and I guess required like, a lot of like effort. And like maybe the take was just really perfect. So he did say the wrong name by accident, but because the take was so good, they decided to keep it in the movie and not refilm it, which I think is a really fun fact that I learned. The next two books are the book club books that I had really bad experience with. So the first one is The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. I gave this a 1 out of 5. I think the book had a lot of potential because it was kind of like based in reality but had magic realism aspect to it. Basically, the book just dragged on forever. So we meet this woman, and she has this attic, and every time her husband goes up this attic, a new husband comes down. So basically, this book kind of talks about, what if you could have a better partner, a better husband? If you're not happy, what if you could just magically get a new husband? But long story short, she basically, be, comes to terms with, no one's perfect, blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. I think the reason why I didn't like this book because I don't like the premise of it that you could just have this like endless, unlimited freedom to just keep changing all the time if you're not happy with something. That's not something I subscribe to in my personal beliefs or the way I lead life. It's very like, oh, the grass is always greener on the other side, but it's not. It's where you water it. So this book really didn't resonate with me, and also like the protagonist is not a great person. She's kind of unhinged, and she was also awful at problem solving. Like, just to like spoil this book a little bit, like there was a point where she thinks the best option is to drug her husband so she can get him to go up this magical attic. It was just like unhinged. I also felt we went through so many reiterations of husbands that I kind of got the point. Like maybe we just had to have 10 reiterations of husbands, not 20 or 30. I do think the premise is interesting because it does prompt interesting discussion points about grass is greener, blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. But I felt the story would have served better as a short story, not a fully fleshed out novel. The next book I read was a book club book. I think because it was like back to back unhinged women, I really struggled with it, but I still gave it a higher score than The Husbands. This book was All Fours by Miranda July. I gave this a 3 out of 5. And again, I'm not sure what I read, but it was definitely an experience. While reading this book and upon finishing it, I wanted to give this book a 1 due to how insufferable the protagonist was. Again, it was a repeat pattern of grass is greener where you water it, not communicating, and also like I felt it maybe would have been better if her husband was kind of like a piece of shit, but he wasn't. He seemed very pleasant. So it was really hard to relate to why the protagonist was so unsatisfied or not content in her life. But the reason why I gave it a 3 is because even the book was so awful, it did a good job at touching on topics that I think are really important that we don't get to talk a lot about in society, or sometimes women don't feel comfortable sharing. And it really had to deal with, the idea of aging as women in society. The protagonist is in, I think, her 40s or late 40s, and, she's not as seen as attractive in society and how she deals with that. It talks about the entering menopause, about having a traumatic birth experience, and also the idea of non-monogamy when you're in a monogamous relationship and exploring your sexuality that way. So I really enjoyed all the topics it touched on, and it did talk about each topic in, I think, details and analogies that I really do appreciate. But just as the protagonist herself and her characters, I wasn't a huge fan of. The last book I read was interesting. I kind of picked this up at the library at a whim because it had an interesting cover. It's called The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton, a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed this book. It's a classic whodunit book. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world, and it kind of like reveals things as you read it. And I felt like the first reveal, where it kind of like turns upside down your understanding of this world, was really good. I don't want to spoil it because I thought it was really interesting. It was really fun trying to figure out, it's post-apocalyptic of our current world, but it's slightly different, and we don't know like when this is happening. So it's really fun to try to figure out like what happened to this world, how far ahead are we, what is similar to our current reality and what is different. So and also like someone's killed, so it has all these different aspects of mystery, figuring out, and I really enjoyed it. The only reason I didn't give it a 5 was because at the end I felt like they're trying to really figure out, like help you figure out who the whodunit was, but it was like too convoluted. There were too many red herrings, and I just love a good classic whodunit where, as a reader, not that it's obvious that, but like maybe I suspect a few people, but in this writing, this novel, there's like too many, and too many like really trying to stretch the connection. But in the end, I still really enjoyed it. I just kind of like it drew out a bit at the last third. Those are my books for February. If you read any of them down below, I'd love to hear what your thoughts were, and I'll see you guys next month. Bye.